have a look.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tokimaru and I am here to have a look at Axol's Quest. This is an RPG Maker game by a solo indie dev named CartMart. They made a few other small RPG Maker projects before, however, they're primarily a 2D animator, which is actually something that drew me to this game. I think this game has an impeccable art style, some very cute animations, and just a generally overall pleasing presentation. Let's start by jumping into the options menu. So this is an RPG Maker game, which is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I haven't played that many RPG Maker games, but from what I have played, a lot of them tend to be a little bit similar just because of the way the program works. It takes a lot of effort to go out of your way to change some of the settings with this game. So I won't harp on some of the issues that I had with the settings too much, just because it's more of an RPG Maker inherent thing rather than something to do with, problems that I have with this game specifically. So first of all, there isn't actually a proper full screen mode. You aren't seeing it in the recording, but this is only windowed. If we jump into the options menu, this is basically it. We don't have any way to change the resolution. There's no full screen on or off. There aren't any rebindable keys. This game is playable with both keyboard and controller. I have seen a few RPG Maker games give you the option to rebind keys, and I do recommend basically every game ever having rebindable controls in their options menu. Like I said, the controller is also usable, but I don't believe this game actually tells you what the controls are for the controller. All of the prompts, as far as I am aware, in-game are for keyboard rather than controller. So that's something that I would recommend, just being able to display controls for controller. Even if for whatever strange behind the scenes RPG Maker reason you can't rebind the keys, I would at the very least recommend having the display for the controller prompts. Always dash on or off. This is actually an option I have seen in a few RPG Maker games where you have a press button to run, but then they give you the option to always be running. I don't know why you would ever want this off. Command remember, I'm not actually quite sure what this does. I think this is also an option I've seen in a few RPG Maker games. Absolutely no clue what it does. Lighting effects on or off. So this game is a top-down 2D RPG. So it's not going to have that many problems in terms of it running on your PC and the graphical fidelity and all that. However, it does make use of a few post-processing lighting effects that do make some part of the games look quite good. However, it ends up running a little bit poorly. I think, I don't know if this is a problem with RPG Maker in general or just this game. It seems like it's a bit poorly optimized, so even on a stronger PC, there are parts later in the game where they make use of these lighting effects a lot, and it ends up running pretty poorly. You get a lot of frame drops. So even though it does look good, I would recommend turning it off. I'm going to keep it on for now because it doesn't seem to be that much of a problem earlier on in the game. Battle camera, you know what's funny? I actually haven't tested this off yet. Then we have several volume sliders. It's a pretty good variety of volume sliders. I'm keeping it at 60% for now. Obviously, you know me, I would prefer an actual slider bar, but I do appreciate the variety in the amount of volume sliders we have. So that's everything in the options menu. It seems pretty typical for RPG Maker games. So like I said, even though I do think it's a little bit sparse, I'm not going to harp on it too much simply because that seems like a limitation of the platform. Let's jump into a new game. I have beaten this game after about 5-ish hours. I've nearly 100%ed it. There's like one collectible that I've managed to miss. So it's a rather short game for an RPG, but I think that it doesn't outstay its welcome. It goes on for long enough to tell its own story, and then it ends on a pretty good note. I'm going to mostly skip through this because I've already read it. You can go ahead and read it on your own time when you play the game, or you can read it on the screen right now as I'm skipping through it. But the art in this game, absolutely phenomenal. I love the very simplistic but still pretty detailed art style. They have all these cutscenes. All the art, I'm pretty sure all the art, even most, if not all of the tile work, has been drawn by hand. But the presentation of this game is pretty beautiful and a little bit above par of from what I've seen of a lot of RPG Maker games. I'm going to wait for this to load. So you are playing as an axolotl named Axol and his younger brother, Lotl. You are a fighter, warrior, treasure hunter. I don't know how you would describe the quote-unquote RPG class of your character. And your brother is a kind of a wizard, kind of a healer, a healing wizard. And you are on a quest for treasure. I'm going to skip through the dialogue a bit. The Mad King's treasure. Yes, that's to be very specific. You're looking for the Mad King's treasure. Now, I think that I'm going to take this moment to talk about what I think of the story. So, like I said before, all of the art in this game is drawn by hand, including all the tile sets. It looks quite good. So sorry, I keep on getting interrupted. So these are the prompts that it gives you for keyboard controls. Let me test this for a second because I don't think I actually have tested it from the beginning with controller. I believe it doesn't actually, yeah, okay. So I have my controller connected. It doesn't actually give you any of the controls for controller. So even though you can play it with controller, you won't know what buttons to press until you test them all out. So like I said, even if you don't have completely rebindable controls, I would recommend at least having the option to present the buttons at the very beginning there instead of just leaving it 100% for 100% keyboard prompts. So like I said, the art, fantastic. Presentation, quite above average. I would like to, while I'm just walking around, I would like to talk about the story. The story is rather short. It is only a 5.5 hour long game. And when I was playing this, I was going through every nook and cranny, trying to find every possible secret. I was going through all the puzzles. I was exploring every area to its full extent. And it still took me about 5.5 hours to get through the entire game, nearly 100%ing it. I will say, I think they do a really good job just designing the overall map for this game. I think I've already goofed. Talking and doing puzzles at the same time is not that good. But I think the overall map design of this game is quite good. They do a really good job at making exploring feel interesting and fun to do. Which I've noticed is, I don't know if I would say it's difficult to do in an RPG Maker game, but it feels like a lot of people use RPG Maker to simply tell their story and then get on with it, and while also having combat sequences in between. Occasionally you have pretty simple puzzles. A lot of them are block pushing puzzles like this one. But I think they did a really good job just designing the overall world map in a way that incentivizes pretty in-depth exploration of all the areas and also returning to previous areas after you've achieved abilities that allow you to unlock certain things. I don't know if I have this here. I believe we have a map of the whole game. This is basically everything in the game. It's a pretty detailed map, all things considered. It shows you pretty much anywhere you can go. And once we get past this initial tutorial island area, we have nearly free reign to go wherever we want, with the exception of a few small things that require an ability to get past. But I think they did a pretty good job at keeping the map tight-knit while also making it feel big and explorable. It's not quite an open world game. I don't know if I would describe it as that, but it does feel pretty good to explore despite most of the game being on this sort of, as you can see here, it's mostly a circular path, but there are enough interesting branches that it makes exploring feel good. But yeah, like I was going to say about the story before I got so rudely interrupted, I think all the characters are a lot of fun. I like the dynamic that we have here in this beginning section between Axol and Laudel, and obviously we have a mysterious guy here. I like the way that they introduce a lot of these side characters. I think there was no secret here, I forgot. I think their motivations, for the most part, are interesting, and they managed to keep a lot of the side characters written into the story pretty well. I think sometimes when you play an RPG and you're collecting a lot of party members, occasionally one or two might end up being forgotten by the narrative, and it feels like they don't really have a place. I feel like they kept the number of party members small enough that they... Oh, do they want me to save here? Small enough that every party member feels like they have a distinct character, but also big enough that there's a pretty decent variety in personalities and roles. Okay, so we're going into a cutscene, I believe, right now. So this entire part is the tutorial. We're going to get into a battle in a second where it's going to teach us how combat works. I think for the most part, the combat in this game is pretty... I don't know if I would call it generic, but I would call it more simplistic. It is similar to the way a lot of RPG Maker games do things. I think a lot of RPG Maker games don't particularly branch out in the most exciting of ways in terms of their combat. This does do a few interesting things with the presentation of the combat. It has a few interesting status ailments, and it has one particular mechanic that I think it makes it feel good to... Sorry, let me try that again. There's one mechanic that you get later on, and I think we actually learn it in this battle, that makes each character's dynamic with each other feel interesting. Now here's the battle presentation. It looks really good. I love the way that the characters are animated. You get to see all the enemies on screen. They have a little bit of an idle animation. And as we move forward through this, you'll see on the bottom, we have both of our characters with little animated portraits. And every time we do something with our characters, for instance, I'm going to attack with Axol. We're going to attack King Adobe. He does his own little attack animation, and they all have different animations for different kinds of attacks. They have animations for when they have certain status ailments. They have animations for when they get hit, as you'll see in a second. Oh! It's really quite charming. This game is very polished. Oh, now he's sad because he's at very low health. So, like I said, the animation in this game, brilliant. The presentation, quite charming. The creator of this game is mostly a 2D animator, like I said. So that is one of the, to me, I think the animation presentation of this game is one of the big draws. So, like I said, the combat is pretty simplistic and in line with a lot of other RPG Maker games. We have an attack button, we have a magic button, you have MP. It's pretty typical fare for an RPG. We're going to heal Axol because that's what this tutorial wants us to do. I think I accidentally pressed the left button and healed Laudel instead. Whoops, my bad. So it turns out this is a tutorial where you're allowed to do the wrong thing. We're going to start by healing Axol. Excellent. Don't forget about the items. So yeah, as you can see, it's not... Why do you say don't forget about the items? Well, I don't really need an item right now. It's not particularly complex at the moment, and it's not that unique, but I do think that they did a pretty good job designing a lot of the later skills of some of your party members, and I think that they mesh pretty well when you get later into the game. One criticism that I do have, one slightly larger criticism that I do of the combat system, is that it's, with a few small exceptions, the game overall isn't that difficult, and eventually you get so many different kinds of abilities that it trivializes pretty much every fight, because you can do basically anything to anyone, and it makes the combat feel, I don't know if I would necessarily say bland, but not as exciting as I think it could be if the game were a little bit more difficult, or if you were a little bit more restricted in some of your abilities. So I'm just going to continue through the game. Waddle has some interesting moves. So he starts with support, which gives random buffs to your party members, which is an interesting one. I feel like that's not the typical ability you see starting with. But I think soon we should be getting to the final primary mechanic. I'm going to support again. Get me through this. It's time to show our special attack. So this... Oh no, okay, so this is Axol's special attack. We're not learning about the other mechanic yet. We're tutorializing the basic elements of RPG Maker combat. We should be getting there soon. Give me 1 second. It's very heavily tutorialized. Okay, so we should now have access to a team attack. So this is the main thing with this game that I think makes the combat a little more interesting than your basic RPG Maker combat, where each character has a special team attack that they can do with one other character. I believe your bar, so you see on the right, that is our TP bar. I believe it only stays at 2. It might go up to 3 or 4. But throughout the battle, you'll slowly build TP so that you can use your team attacks. And eventually, you're able to get several different team attacks where each one character can team up with another one character. So you end up having like 3-ish team attacks per character, and they're all unique and do really interesting things. I think they do a really good job at combining the characters' personalities and abilities in interesting ways. But because the combat is pretty basic and the difficulty of the game overall is pretty easy, it does tend to kind of trivialize combat. That is one sort of bigger criticism I have with this game's combat. So I'm just going to do as much damage as I can, because I think we're nearing the end of the tutorial now that they've taught us about team attacks. We're going to get through here. The art in this game is just so charming. I love seeing it every single time. Excellent. You're going to flurry of blades. Hopefully we get to the end of this soon. We're going to regenerate. This casts on the whole party. Whoops. Give me a second. We should be almost there. Okay, and that's basically everything you need to know. Once you get out of the tutorial and into the main game, I'm also not going to progress any further because I think there are some pretty interesting story beats coming up, and I don't want to spoil it for you. But I want to talk a little bit about the rest of the game. So like I said, the map is one big circle. They do a really good job at incentivizing exploration. I think that even though it's not quite an open world game, the but the areas are pretty wide despite being on one circular path. There are some interesting branches, some pretty good puzzles. There are a lot of secrets in this game. I think they did a really good job hiding and putting secrets in very interesting places that make it a lot of fun to try to explore. I think a lot of these sort of smaller, very basic RPG Maker games have trouble making interesting secrets just overall. I think it's hard for a lot of these games to sort of create alternate paths that are a little bit difficult to find, but also accessible enough that it makes you want to keep searching for them. Because sometimes you get into a situation where maybe it's too difficult to like even see where you can or can't go, or sometimes it's sometimes it's just like a small area off to the side of the map. I think they do a really good job at finding the perfect difficulty in terms of finding the secrets. There are like actually, that's wrong. There are like 5 or 6 areas in this game. I think they do a pretty decent job at diversifying the environment and the types of enemies that you fight in each area. Some of them can get a little repetitive, especially early in the game, where you're stuck in a couple of pretty samey areas. It starts to expand in terms of enemy diversity later in the game. There's like maybe 1 or 2 enemy recolors, but that's about it. Let me see, what else is there? There are some fun side characters that they introduce. I think the dialogue for a lot of the NPCs is interesting enough that it incentivizes actually talking to all the NPCs, even if they don't all necessarily have something important to contribute to either the story or items or anything. A lot of them are actually just a lot of fun to listen to. But yeah, that should be pretty much everything I can describe without completely spoiling some of these story beats later on in the game. Oh, actually, one of the big things that I think is pretty cool about this game in terms of the collectibles and finding secrets, and also ties into the combat, is that there's one specific type of item that you need to look for in order to unlock those big, powerful team attacks. And like I said, I ended up almost 100% of the game, so I had a huge variety of different kinds of team attacks that I could use by the end of the game, but it did sort of end up trivializing the combat to the point where I don't think I ever lost a game once. I might have had 1 or 2 party members get KO'd throughout the whole game. But take that as you will in terms of whether or not you really should be trying to collect all the collectibles and get all the team attacks, because as it stands, the game is pretty easy. But you could probably argue that maybe this game is sort of targeted at a little bit of a younger demographic that might be less experienced with RPGs, and that's okay. I think it's actually okay that this game is easy, because I think the characters are interesting, because I think the presentation is charming. It does have a lot that I think is worth looking at aside from the difficulty of the combat. So yes, that has been Axol's Quest. Like I said, there is a game jam version of the game available on itch.io, and this game is available in full for $6.99 or your regional equivalent on Steam. My name has been Tokimaru. I will see you all next time.